Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I think we have a good number of people joining us today, so I would like to start. So my name is Sampos. I'm currently a research fellow with the Center for Khmer Study, and I'm just gonna welcome everyone to our online workshop today. And thank you for your time joining us. Today we have 4 speakers: Professor Michele Ford, the director of Sydney Southeast Asia Center and at the University of Sydney, and Dr. Tri Tuan from the Royal University of Phnom Penh, and Vajra from the PhD student from the University of Sydney, and myself also will be one of the speakers. And today we will also have 3 sessions. The first session will be covered by myself and Dr. Tri Tuan to discuss the importance of doing literature review. And then the second session will have Professor Michele Ford share her tips and strategies on how to conduct literature review. And the third session, I will be sharing a presentation about how to use a tool to manage bibliography in doing literature review. And each session will be about 1 hour, and then we will have 10 minutes break in between each session. So if you have any question, you can also pop it in the chat, and we'll try to answer while we also doing the discussion and presentation. So I'll hand this over to Professor Michele Ford to get started.
Thank you very much, Sampwas, and welcome to everyone who's joining us in this session. As you all know, literature reviews are very important and quite challenging. So hopefully you will get some good information out of this session today. Dr. Tri, do you mind turning on your camera so that the participants can see you? And also, yeah.
It seems somebody closed my cameras. Yes. Can you ask the host to turn on? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Start my video. Yeah. The host already.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Right. So as Sampwas said, in this first session, she and Tri are going to talk to us about why we need to do literature reviews, why they're important. And we're going to structure this as a conversation. So I'm going to ask them some questions, and they're going to answer them. But if you would like to ask them questions also, you can type them in the question and answer function. So we'll come to your questions after I've asked a few. So please don't be shy. And if you would like to write your questions in Khmer, you can also do that. They don't have to be in English. Okay, well, let's start with you, Tri. Can you briefly describe to us your research experience? What research have you done?
Thank you, Michele Ford, for these questions. Actually, I have started my research in 2004 when I was start to review one's research project in the remote area in Cambodia. And so this research is very much focused on the development study and urban environments. And since then on, I learned how to overcomes the difficulties to get it done at the first start, so that I start to learn step by step on how the literature should be constructed. Yeah.
So just before we get to the literature review, can you tell us a little bit about the methodologies you use and exactly what you do study? Maybe now. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I think when we did a literature review, we start to help our research topics or the project that we are working on, and then when we see our project title, and then we start to question ourselves: who has done this research before, and what type of methodologies or what type of research findings they generate. And then why your research should be different, or what is the missing knowledge research finding from this existing research work that inspire you to continue doing research. And this is one of the key foundation that I have been engaged in over the past decade, and later on we move a little bit higher level to what is the theoretical level that is a more abstract one that we have been involved in. Yeah.
Okay, Sampwas, Tree's given us a few important tips already about why a literature review is important and when we start to think about it. Can you illustrate those tips through telling us a little bit about your own research?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle, for your question. I can share a little bit about my own research as to extend what Tree had already shared. So in doing literature review,
I'm sorry, Sampwas, if you could take a step back and just tell us what you research, your methodologies, so that the participants can get a sense of what you do first. That would be great.
Okay, yes, I can start with that. So I have a background in qualitative research, and as of now, I'm also doing qualitative research also with my current research with the Center for Khmer Studies. And I typically, when I have a research project, I usually start off with reviewing literature and also doing annotation to like skim the literature that I found relevant, and then highlights the key idea, and then also jot down any important arguments or key ideas in that particular article that I found relevant to what I want to do, and annotate it. And I find annotations very helpful in the process of doing literature review. At least that's from my experience and how I learn how to conduct literature review.
Okay, I'm going to push you a little bit harder on that. So maybe thinking about your PhD research, Sampwas finished her PhD not so long ago. What was the topic of your PhD, and what body of literature did you need to engage in?
So I did a PhD in political science with a focus on social policy studies. So the topic of my research was on the aging population and the national aging policy in Cambodia. And so because my topic is quite interdisciplinary, not necessarily in the political science and policy study alone, but it also has some element in sociology and cultural anthropology, as well as demographic studies. So I had to gather a lot of resources from all these other relevant disciplines, including, like I said, these disciplines like I just mentioned, and also not just focusing on Cambodia, but relevant studies of other countries that share some similarities with Cambodia. And so, for example, I study the national aging policy. I also look at aging policy in the Philippines, or other welfare policy program relevant in the Philippines or Thailand in the region. I also look at other country in other region that's may have share a similar characteristic to Cambodia, like, for example, developing country and aging population increasing, and etc. So I engage in welfare policy literature. I engage in socio-demographic change literature. I engage in policy studies, like the general policy study literature. So these are just a few examples. So any research topic can be quite interdisciplinary. So you'd have to look at a wide ranging of literatures.
So something I would like to draw out there for our participants, two things that Sampwas has said. First, literature can sit within one discipline or in different disciplines. And depending on whether it sits in one discipline or many disciplines, you have a more simple or a more complicated task. The more disciplines you need to engage with, the more complicated it gets. But even say if you're a student and you're writing a small thesis on, say, sociology, and it's a topic on Cambodia, the second point that Sampwas made is important. So at one level, you're looking at theoretical literature, hopefully, that helps you explain in in theoretical or abstract terms what you're studying, but you're also probably looking at empirical literature. And as Sampua said, this doesn't mean just looking at the literature on Cambodia, for example. It also means looking at comparative literature. And there are two types of comparisons that are important here in geographical terms. One is looking at similar countries. So for example, countries elsewhere in Southeast Asia. But another one might be looking at quite different countries to help you understand where Cambodia sits in a broader context. So Tree, if I could turn to you and ask you a similar question, it's probably a lot longer since you did your PhD, I don't know. But can you tell us what your PhD project was on and what literatures you engaged with?
Yes, my PhD is a topic at the time is we focus on the urban climate resilience in South Asia. And this is one of the key areas that they try to shift away to see urban resilience away from the physical science and climate science, but to focus more on the human side, that human resilience. And when we conduct the literature study at the time, I was instructed to collect all the key relevant topics from the library. I do the library search, and I classify into the land use to urbanism, and also the formation of social class in urbanism in South Asia. And so this is like all interdisciplinary, from cultural anthropology, from urban sociology, from political science, and also spatial planning in South Asia. And later on, I tried to read through this to understand the key context of urban developments that influence the decision makings. And then from the social science, when we are talking about the social study, somehow we always focus on the social class. That is very difficult to get out of the research. That very big topic of social class. And then one of the key thinking that we come up in between is to create the strategic social group in between social class, to understand how these people influence the urban developments and urban climate resilience. So the study is going around a lot in a very long list of literature review, from the book publication, from the different journals and different research topics classifications. Yeah, that is that is one of the key process I prepare the literature review, and to understand the state of body and knowledge on urban climate resilience.
Yeah. So Tree, my big question for you is, did you find it easier to read in one discipline than some of the others? Like, was it the same reading in all the disciplines, or did you find some things harder to read than other things, and why?
I think it is difficult to focus on one discipline to explain the social issue in terms of urban development in urban politics. So yes, I did spend a lot of time to sit in the library of architecture and urban designing, and talking with one professor on the urban planning. So I start to understand more how the urban planning has been developed, and what are the key concepts and theory that influence the urban planning, to build a basic understanding, to understand this type of process. And then, like in the final stage, we need to understand what are the key missing point, what are the key problem we try to address, and that we can contribute to our research study.
So taking up that theme, Sampwas, when you were reading your literature, how did you find those gaps, the things that we need to understand or address?
Oh, yes. The first thing, not all the literature we read is useful. Somehow we spend a lot of time reading, and then say, this is not very much relevant. So we try to make more relevant, select the final relevant that's linked to our study, add up to our study area that this type of research methodology, this type of theoretical work can be adopted and enhanced further to analyze our research context and research area. Yeah, that is that what I did so far. Yeah.
Thank you. And Sampwas, how did you identify the gaps in the literature when you were doing your study?
So when I was doing my study, similar to what Tree just mentioned, sometimes we spend a lot of time reading many different articles and we don't find them useful. So for me, when I find literatures, when I see topics that are relevant to my research, I usually would go through its content to find, in order to understand what exactly this article or book focus on. If it's an article, I just quickly skim through the abstract. If it's a book, I skim through the content. And then when to identify the gap, I look at their key argument and their theoretical engagement in that paper or in the book. So to identify the gaps that maybe I can address in my own paper. Yeah.
So Tree, you mentioned before that it's really important to start to really understand what people were saying. But of course, when we're doing a literature review, as you said, we read many things, many books, many articles. How did you take your notes? And can you give us some tips and tricks that the participants could use?
Okay. Yeah, this is a very tricky one. Somehow for me, I try to develop something that I find it easy to remember for myself and to make use of myself. Like the first thing I start from what is the theoretical work. This I mean this is from the scientific paper. Like what is the key concept that they also use, and later on we try to understand where the history or concept come from, and then what are the the latest research finding, the key argument of this one. And of course, the final one, to make it easy one, what type of methodology that they also try to apply, and what are the missing point, what are the gap that they find out. So when we take note, when we reading, so we try to make notes that link to the contribution of the knowledge and the missing gap and the methodology they apply. Yeah, that is a simple one that I did, and also I keep doing this up to now. Yes, doing this.
So as Tree has said, it's very important to take notes that aren't necessarily about all the detail. They're about the bigger picture, about the key concept, and maybe about the methodology and maybe the key points. So Tree, you say that you have continued to do this up to now. How do you keep track of your notes? How do you organize them and keep them?
Yes, this is there are different ways. I think one of my special note is I do like manually a note that I keep tie in my computer, keep it one place. But recently, since 2018, we have involved with digital software that can help to record this one. I think what you will present later on, also one of the key software that can summarize the research article that you record and you summarize the key points. So it's easy, sometimes to extract that and to support your writing very, very quick. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Sampwas, if I can turn to you, what tips and tricks would you like to share with our audience?
So from my own experience regarding the tips of how to take note and keep them organized in one place, before I learned how to use Zotero and got used to it, I just take it on Google Doc, because that I can also access on my phone. Sometimes I just read the articles and I don't have my computer with me, so I can also access it on Google Doc where I write it down. And it's also saved in both my computer and my phone, and you don't always have to have computer with you to take note if you read sometime. And then when I start learning how to use Zotero, I organize my folder based on each research topic that I work on, and then I just take note on that Zotero itself, because Zotero has a function where you can put down notes next to the reference. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Tree, back to you. Oh, you busy?
Yeah.
Back to you. An important challenge, especially for younger scholars, is learning to work out what is a good source and what's not a good source. How do you judge the quality of particular sources?
I think the first thing we need to train ourselves to like reading first. Like reading means that when you like reading, you start to understand what are the scientific source of material you draw from, and what are the non-scientific. So like now we have a lot of information floating around. If you do Google search, you can get a lot of the saying that something that not very scientifically proved or academically acknowledged. That is one thing we need to understand that. And secondly, like when we start to understand the theoretical work and theoretical background, and we understand who are the key authors. I think the key author one of the key idea to track. Like when you have a different name, and then maybe we try to read a little bit more whether this scholar can produce something different, or maybe just end up with the same key argument from the previous one. So scientific and non-scientific is very much different. Scientific is a lot of something that academic and more peer review oriented. Yeah. That's what I try to trust this one in.
And how do you work out who the key authors are?
I think that there are two things. One is we look at our research topics and then we try to search who are the key authors that has written research topics and research project on this area. And secondly, we try to trace the key idea of the author, how he or she developed the idea or theoretical framework to analyze the research study. So this is that is something that it convinced me when I did a study like this one.
Thanks very much. What about you, Sampwas? Do you have any tips on how to work out who the key authors are?
I agree with what Tree had shared also, that we first have to get ourselves familiar with the key people in each research area. Say, for example, like someone who's worked on labor policy in Southeast Asia, like you, then we know, okay, this person has published a lot on this particular topic. So if you know who are the key person working on this topic, you'll know where to find reliable resources. And it would also expand the community of these people will be together. If you know one key person, then you'll get to know the other key person, because it will always be in the reference of those articles.
And that's a really key trick, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you find a good article, you can look at what reference they are citing, and that's a great way to find other good sources. But Sampwas, I want to ask you another question. You did your PhD in the United States, and personally, I'm based in Australia, and I find sometimes when reading work done in the United States that scholars based there sometimes don't pay much attention to sources published in other countries. I think this is a challenge for people working on Southeast Asia, because there's actually a lot of very good work not published through those sorts of journals. So how do we keep a critical eye, or understand that it's not just knowing that group of scholars? And sometimes if you look at just the best scholars, you might get an impression, whether it's true or not, that they're in a particular place. How do we make sure that we engage broadly with the scholarship while maintaining quality?
So this is also a tricky question, to be honest. And I noticed the same gaps with scholars who work in similar field or same region and based in different locations across the world. There's no simple way to do that, but you can always try to address the gap, for example, by say like going to conference, for instance. You are likely to meet these people, people coming from everywhere. Like say, for example, the Association of Asian Studies conference. You're likely to meet more people than just people who based in North America. And then even if you cannot go to the conference, a lot of conference, area study conference, they will always publish the conference schedule, and you can look at the panel, each panel, and find who do what based on the topic. And then and I don't know for other, but for me, that's how I also find people who do similar things to me, sometime in Europe, sometime in Australia, and I did my PhD in the US. Say, for example, I found someone who did similar research to me in Spain, and I was based in Hawaii. And I found this through going through a conference, a conference on Southeast Asian studies in Europe.
Thanks for that. I have lots more questions, but I want to go to the chat for the moment, the Q&A. And remember, everyone else, you too can put questions in the Q&A function if you would like to ask them. But I would like to start with actually the second question that's been asked, and that is, based on your experience, what mistakes do students make in their literature reviews? Now, Chandana asked this, and I'm going to talk about this in the next session as well, but I am very interested to hear both from Tree, and maybe Tree first as an academic at a university in Cambodia. What mistakes do your students make when they try to do a literature review, Tree?
Okay, yeah, very good question. I think this is a very important also for those who study in Cambodia. I read through many papers submitted by the student also. I think one of the big mistakes is how to differentiate what are the theoretical work and what are the research problems that the student need to differentiate. When you read the academic papers, and you should not try to generalize at first, but you try to differentiate. Sometimes the same topic, the same area of study, but the key finding different, the key argument is different. Yeah, that is a very, very critical one. And this is how we read the paper in a very critical way also. How to differentiate is the most important thing. Yeah.
So if I can summarize that, there is a difference between the theoretical framing and the empirical work. And even papers with the same empirical focus might use a whole different literature, a whole different way of framing it, even if they use the same literature. And that affects what their conclusions are. Because when we do research, that idea that we bring, the theoretical idea that we bring, affects what we see and what we understand. So that's the thing about the literature. It's important to read it and understand it, but then to think critically about it, as Tree has said, but also test it against your own knowledge of the empirical issue. And especially for scholars in area studies, we think that's really important. If I can have another go at the US-based scholars, especially in political science, sometimes I feel like some scholars come to Southeast Asia and they already have a model and they're just looking for a case. And so their assumptions are already in their head. Whereas from an area studies perspective, we would say, of course, you want to read and do your literature review, but then your theory should be in conversation with your evidence. And sometimes if you use evidence from a place like Cambodia or Indonesia or the Philippines, it might challenge that theory. Because just because some people think a theory is true doesn't mean that it applies everywhere. So if we go back to the questions of gaps, sometimes we can find the gap by critically thinking about whether or not a theory works in a particular country. And I think that's a really important tip there. Sorry for any of the US-based scholars listening out there, but it's an easy target. Okay, we have Sampos, did you want to say anything about what mistakes did you make when you were doing your literature review?
I mean, it's everything you both had said already. It's adopting the whole theory to the case study on the ground without testing it and try to challenge it. That's an important gap. That's everyone should learn how to address, and you should also learn start from being a student, because by the time you finish graduate school and you just learn how to do that, maybe it's a little bit too late. And I wish I knew more of this when I was a PhD student myself. And also the other gap is that often students make is they just describe the theory that is already exist, and they don't try to learn how to apply it to the actual case study and challenge it. And that's a tricky part also, that I think everyone, it's important for researchers to be careful with that.
Yeah. And if I can comment on that, I think there are actually two issues related to that. One is just describing and not applying and not thinking critically about it. Another is a more technical aspect about writing the literature review. And when I think back to the literature review I wrote for my PhD, it was terrible. I think my supervisor should have given me some more critical feedback, because basically I looked at some other PhDs and I saw that they described one author and then another author and then another author, and then they brought it together. And that's not a good way to write a literature review. We'll talk about again this a bit more later, and Vitra will also tell us what she thinks. But from I know the best way to write a literature review is actually in your voice as the author, right? So even if you're a student, you still have a right to have an opinion, right? So once you've read all the literature and you've processed it, the literature review should be structured to set up a conceptual framework. So you should be dealing with the literature in a way that ends up at a place that helps the reader understand your data and how you're analyzing your data. And I think that's a really big challenge, even for many established scholars, but it's a particularly big challenge for students who are just starting out. Okay, we have another great question in the chat. Someone's asking, what happens when we're researching a particular topic and there's not very much literature on it? How do you go about starting your literature review then? How should we arrange our content in a way that it connects deeply with our topic and doesn't just make the reader get lost? This is a great question, and I'm looking forward to your answer, Tree.
Yeah, I think this question, it looked like, what I have been gone through recent years. I had done one research on gender participation, like more inclusively from the poorer resource user group. And the first thing we start to have a couple of literature only, that here when we are back in the country here, we don't have much access to the scientific paper like a top university that you can generate thousands of academic papers when you search it. And I did face this one recently, since this is another research topic that it's shift away from my urban study a little bit. And so one thing that I try to do is to search for my friend who has work on this one, and then ask him to answer our question a little bit, 2 or 3 questions, and then how can he respond that with the reference. So he start to cite the reference, and then I start to realize that yes, maybe this is a reference that we can review more critically and rewrite it, and then we write in a better way. So that's one part of the strategy we select, not to harvest our friends' knowledge or idea, but this is how we lost our source to get where the reference should be get, like a policy document. Also somehow it's not easy to get in a certain level. So the second one is academic level, somehow it's a little bit difficult when we don't have access to a journal like the other university in the world, and we seek support from friends who can share some reference that we can read ourselves to contextualize and to problematize. I think contextualize and problematize is one of the key areas also that we try to fulfill the first knowledge gap, and second is we also need to support the reference and the literature that we need to support our study. Yeah, that is my experience recently, 2-year experience. I've been struggling a lot, and just recently that we managed to finalize the paper. Yes, thank you very much for this question.
And Sampwas, what would your answer to those questions be?
I also faced some challenge when I was doing a similar challenge to this question when I was doing my PhD dissertation research. There weren't many literatures at all on aging population in Cambodia and the aging policy, especially. There were only I remember there was only 2 scholars that really study aging population in Cambodia, and it was very challenging. So I, and also these 2 scholars, they were more like a population studies people, like statistic, not as studying the socioeconomics of the aging population. So what I did was I also talked to people who does similar thing, and when I was in the field, I talked to people who implement the work or work on the aging population itself. For example, an organization based in Battambang, they work on aging population in Cambodia since the 90s. So they have knowledge of this field, and they also have referred me to the right people that I can talk to and use as reference, and also refer me some useful resources as well. So just because you cannot find literatures online, and you can also find it through this through participant in your study, or relevant people who are practitioners. They may not be academics, but they can also help you refer you to reliable resources.
Now, of course, our participants might not have as good networks as you two have, so that can be challenging. But of course, you can, I think one of the key points here is that some of the literature might not be academic literature. As Tree said, you might want to get some policy reports, you might want to identify some key people in your field of research. And I mean, you have to be careful not to waste people's time, but if you prepare as well as you can, you might be able to find someone who's happy to give you some time. I guess another of my tips in this field would be to think laterally, think broadly. Don't think narrowly about your topic, but think about what other kinds of topics might relate to it. So for example, what's a good example? I'll have to come back to that example, but my other tip would be, we've covered it before, but also don't think just about your geographical area. There might be stuff written about other countries that gives you a way into the literature. And often the best theoretical literature will probably not be on your country, right? It will probably be somewhere else. And that doesn't matter what country you're in. It's not about being in Cambodia. It's just a general thing. But my other point was, especially if you're doing a topic that not many people have thought about, maybe thinking about a topic that shares some similarities, and then finding literature on that, and then helping that get you into your topic. So that might help too. Okay, we have another one. This is a really important one. And obviously, if you're in this seminar, you do speak English. But the question is, how do you help students overcome the language barriers in research? Is there a better way to bring more research into Khmer language in order to help future researchers? Tree, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think this is the experience we face when we are teaching and also starting doing research. One of the experience we use so far, like we as a lecturer, you may spend time to read your student writings, and then you start to question, like, oh, I don't understand this paragraph, I don't understand this paragraph. If I were you, I can write like this, and then so this is we train them how to write already and how to problematize, how to construct the key argument in the paragraph. So if they really want to study like this, and then I think that systematically they has been trained how to do writing reviewing without
Okay,
real.
so I might jump in there. So
Yeah,
of course people can improve their English or their Vietnamese or their Thai or whatever language they need to access the materials. But there's also a fundamental challenge of accessing materials in Khmer, right? So some examples I can think of, in Indonesia, there are a couple of local journals that have local research and they publish that in Indonesian. But in every edition, they also publish a key article translated into Indonesian. Is there anything like that in Cambodia?
Oh, this one I don't have much experience. Since our country maybe is still very young in promoting like academic writings in Khmer that can be scholarly used as a citation, as a scientific. Yeah, sometimes the style of writing, sometimes only one people, and then they write only their own story, and then sometimes difficult to create academic like key arguments. Reference to support the counter key argument, something like this one. But yes, if more and more like promoted the Khmer writing publication in Cambodia at the moment. Yeah. Thank you for this one.
Sampos, did you have any ideas about that question? It's a very good one.
From what I know the Ministry of Education has like a journal published in Khmer, but that's more education focused. It's not very like in a wider selected fields yet. It's still very at a very early stage in this regard. So, and this is the challenge that local researchers in Cambodia face, in addition to the limited access to resources, but also limited access to finding resources in Khmer language that can be used as a that can be cited in academic paper. But to be honest, it's also a challenge. I myself, as a second language English speaker, learning how to read and write academically in English and is publishable. It's still challenging for me too. So every day for me to my only simple tip is just practice writing, even commentary article or even book review. Is I find it very helpful. Writing book review is very helpful in practicing writing and improving your English for publication.
And I must say, Sampwas writes very nicely in English, so it's obviously working for her. But maybe one other practical tip, if you're a more junior student, maybe you could get together with some friends and find one English language article each, and then use Google Translate to get a rough translation. It would be better than nothing. And then you could read the English, but also read the Khmer. And I mean, that would take time because you would have to cut and paste different paragraphs. But say you had 5 friends and you all did one, then you would have 6 Khmer language versions. So, and even though things like Google Translate are not perfect, it can help you understand the English better if you have both versions. So I think the main thing is it takes a long time, as Sampwas has said, to learn to read and write academic English very well if you're a second language speaker. So you need to have some other ways of managing in the meantime to help you along. So that would be my tip there. We do have a question about tax law, but none of us are lawyers, are we? So we might have to let that go, that one. I don't really know much about the literature in law. Do either of you know anything about literature in law, Sampuas or Tree?
I must apologize with this one, but like learning from the literature study, maybe we can do research through the academic research, through the scientific publications, through a technical publication and policy review. So with the blind idea, with this knowledge on how to do study literature review, maybe we can reconstruct the state of knowledge on the tax law a little bit on that. Yeah, even we don't have existing knowledge on that. But yes, literature is very helpful to frame you how to understand the basic knowledge how the tax law are being constructed and operated.
Yeah, I guess my tip would be find some law journals that deal with tax law and see how those scholars do it. Because this is another big tip. When writing, I mean, don't do what I did when I did my PhD and follow a bad example of a literature review. But if you know if you can work out what a good one is, then using a model or reading many models is a great way to learn. So if you look at a lot of, and start being critical. Oh, this article has a really good literature review. This article has a really bad literature review. And you can tell, if you know what to look for, you can start to tell, right? So things like what we said before about, using your own voice, the author using their voice to synthesize the literature, to bring it together and make it work for them. As Tree said, that's more conceptual and really sort of teases out concepts, or if you're studying, you could ask your supervisor to tell you this article and this article and this article have good literature reviews. But when you read them, you should look at not just what they tell you, but how they are telling you, what job different paragraphs are doing. Really go down to that analysis of what we call genre, right? So if you learn what to do in the different paragraphs, then you've still got to get the information to get into it, but you'll be able to write it better after that. Okay. Do we have any more questions in just a minute? I think we do have another one. We have a couple more. Excellent. Okay. Do we have any tips for the literature review? I think we've been giving lots of tips already, but the next one's really interesting. How do you see ChatGPT playing a role in the literature review in the future? What are the advantages and the risks? Sampuas, do you want to start us on that one?
Goes in.
You're on mute, Sampuas.
Sorry, I would refer this to you or to Tree. I can't really take this one.
Okay, no worries. Yeah. Tree, did you have a thought about this?
I had no idea about this one, but recently I have a talk with my colleagues from Singapore, from Malaysia. Like somehow there is a ghostwriting, like they write even better than human being also. So I don't know the question. Maybe we need to differ a little bit on that one. I have not exposed very much on this one, but informal conversation I did recently with friends in the region.
Well, it's interesting. Just today, one of my colleagues at the University of Sydney said to me, she's involved in a conference, and the conference organizers sent round in the email today saying that they were happy for people to help use ChatGPT to write their papers, but that they had to acknowledge it in the sources and that they had to take responsibility for the content. I haven't actually played with ChatGPT myself, but I have seen what people have produced, including one of my colleagues produced a strategic plan for a university just randomly, and it was excellent. The structure was really good. So I think actually ChatGPT has a role, especially in helping non-English speakers and people who are not so familiar with the genre to get the structure of a literature review. But the trouble is, it can't do the brain work for you, right? It crawls the internet and it finds information that other people have put up and it just puts it together. So, but once you've done all your reading and your note-taking and your thinking, to be honest, I think especially for people in non-English speaking countries, it's worth having a play and just seeing what it produces, but it can't replace that hard work, right? It can't replace the thinking work. It can't replace the synthesis work, but it might be able to help you with the language and the structure a bit. I don't know, but I don't know how to say your name properly, but Dronker, if you've tried and you find out that it works, please let us know.
Yeah. Maybe his understanding also. Yeah, you can ask him to share his view on that also. Yeah.
Now this is a good one.
Yeah.
Could we share some tips on how to stay productive and not procrastinate when you are stuck on your literature review? What an excellent question. Tree, do you want to go first?
Okay, who said any tip to literature you already read?
So no, stay productive and not procrastinate.
Okay, yeah.
When you're stuck.
I think when we study at the higher level, we end up with a thousand of literature that we get stuck, and you end up with reading, you knowing without like a conclusion. I have my experience like at one time I pushed myself to stop and then put into writings to the paper structure, so that we found and then we need to do something no regret first, like we cannot put every literature into our writing, so we just put something that we can operate, like operationalizing the concept, something like that. So it's help us to reduce to be no regret, to put everything all together. Yeah, that is I used to have experience like that. I don't have the perfect tip to this one, but yes, when we are moved to at the PhD level, we end up a lot of reading every day, and then now with only knowing and talking, and then how can you conceptualize, writing down, operationalizing your idea into the paper? That is we need to make a sharp decision so that we can reduce a lot of floating around. Yeah.
Okay, Sampuas, what are your tips about staying productive and not procrastinating when you're stuck on a literature review?
So I must say that I'm not a fan of procrastination. I don't like to procrastinate. I don't like to finish thing last minute, because then I have a lot of anxiety, and that's just my own thing. But you know, procrastination is common thing happen among many people. So my simple tip is that if you get stuck with the literature review section when you write your paper, is that you work on the other section, like the method section or the empirical section, that doesn't require a lot of brain digestion like you're doing literature review. And that way that you continue to write and stay productive, and you skip the literature review for now, and then you can go back later and your brain still stay fresh. So
yeah, so I call this productive procrastination. So my strategy for procrastinating is doing something else that's not so urgent but is still useful. Because that way it gives our brain a rest. And I think too, it's important to, as Sampuas has suggested, not to try to do the same kind of work all the time. It's much better to have a range of tasks that you can dip in and out of. But if you're really stuck in your literature review, my other tip would be to break it down into smaller bits. So don't say, oh, I'm going to have to do my literature review today. Just say, I'm going to take notes on this one article, and then I get to do something else. So if you get stuck, it's often because we're feeling a bit hopeless or a bit anxious, or we don't feel like we understand. So also you might want to say, I've got these 20 articles that I've found. I think they're all relevant, but I'm finding it hard. So there's two strategies. As Tree said, a really good one is to go for things you can operationalize. So things that you think relate really closely to what you want to end up doing. Another strategy, if you're stuck, is to start with the easy ones. So if you've got 20 articles, say, okay, these are the 5 easiest ones. So I'm going to read and take notes on those today. And then my other tip, and I'll talk about this a bit in the next session also, is starting to build up a mind map of key concepts, but also like a map of different authors and the way they fit together. Okay, we're running out of time, but there is one last question I'd like to ask from the chat. And that is, any tips on leveraging literature that you've already read in narrowing down an article or a dissertation topic? This person's read a lot within the subject areas they're interested in producing a piece on, but they're having a hard time narrowing it down to identify a specific, unique topic to write about. Yeah, Tree,
yeah.
do you want to start?
Yeah, this one is difficult to give the exact answer. Only sharing experience because I have not sort of written down the tip. This one. Somehow when we did this, in my case I try to stick in one key arguments when I read like writing a dissertation. You review a lot of key writer, key author, and key article, and key interview a lot, and then finally difficult to put them all together. And then what I can do at that time is to put one key central idea, key central author that we can build further, extend more what we can operate. And then because this is like at first is a part of the learning process that we need to move on rather than to get stuck. Yeah, I think many people get stuck when we did such writing, even writing an article. Sometimes I get stuck many months the same, but we just keep ignoring. But it really stuck. Yeah, something like this is to get move on with one key also key idea that we can operate, can build further understanding. Is it the point?
So Sampwas, if we know a lot of literature, but we're having trouble finding a sharp focus for something we want to write, Sampwas, what would be your advice?
So this is a difficult question to answer because, to be honest, I have never really just read random literatures and try to narrow down topic. I usually have a topic already in my head of like at least like a broad topic of what I want to do, and then I gather relevant resources based like have a central idea like how like Tree mentioned, and try to gather relevant resource, and then you skim through the resource you have and then organize the most relevant one, the least relevant one, you keep it aside. So how to identify a sharp literature is again comes down to the key people who work in this field, who is try to find who is the like or what is the highest impact factor journal that publish on this topic. For example, if you work on you want to study tourism studies, you want to go and have a look at what are the high impact factor journal like on the journal website and that publish on this, and then you'll know because all the established scholars, they would publish in the very high impact journals, and that when you find the most critical resource and that you can read and try to leverage the topic, narrow down your topic.
So I guess one other hint, especially if you're trying to, for example, choose a topic about Cambodia, if you already have a broad idea of your theme, your broad topic area, if you read the comparative literature on Mexico, on all sorts of countries that are not Cambodia, you might find a study that really you think, gee, that's an interesting question, but I think it would be different here. And so I think beyond reading theory, by reading actual other studies, you might be able to find something that's a gap in the Cambodian literature or the literature on Cambodia, but has been studied elsewhere. And by doing that, what it does is if it gives you a parallel kind of study that you can then use to ask the critical sorts of questions that we've been talking about. So not just, it's not copying, it's actually finding a really good starting point for a critical engagement. We're out of time, but one of our questions has been to could we recommend some reading materials on how to do an extensive literature review? So Tree and Sampwas, do you want to do a little bit of thinking about that during our 10-minute break? And we might ask you what your answers are just before we start the next session. But everyone, thank you very much. That's been a great first hour. As Sampwas said at the beginning, we'll have a 10-minute break now, and we'll start again at, what is it, your time? 10 past 2 Cambodian time. Talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
For those links for our attendees today, and also I don't know if we want to answer the last question before we went on to break, or would you like to just go ahead? Okay. So I know Michelle has already introduced herself in the first session, and Vechara, one of our speakers, also has not introduced herself. So I'd like to start with Vechara. Would you please give an introduction of yourself to our attendees?
Sure. Hi, thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Vechara. I'm a PhD student at the University of Sydney, Misha student actually, and happy to be here.
Thank you, Vechara. So on the second session, we are talking about we are going a little more in depth in the process of doing literature review with Michelle, because she has a lot of experience supervising students and mentoring students on how to conduct literature review. So Michelle, I'd like to start a bit with you on, can you please reflect on the main challenge that your student has faced so far when writing literature review, including international students there at Sydney?
Okay, I don't think that international students necessarily have more challenges than local students. We have talked about a lot of the challenges already, but some of the additional, so I won't repeat the ones we talked about in the first session, but some of the additional things, especially for second language speakers of English, is a tendency to either use the direct words that are in the literature or just paraphrase them really closely and rely on describing what that article does rather than analysing it. And as I said, that's not necessarily just a problem for overseas students, but it is a big challenge. So that's one of them. Another one, I guess, is searching techniques. People who either look too narrowly or too broadly and don't really find that sort of space that their thesis or their work's going to belong in. And I guess a third one would be, and this is the biggest one, it's really the synthesis. How do you bring it all together and make it your own? How do you move from just describing, as I said before, to actually using the literature to make the points you want to make, rather than using them to describe what other people have done? So I think that would be my main 3 points.
Okay. And before we are moving on to your presentations, I also want to turn to Vechara as a student yourself. I want to know, because Michelle is your supervisor and she's very good at guiding through this literature review process, because myself also learning a lot from her. What can you tell us a little more on what strategies that she has taught you for doing better literature reviews based on your experience?
Yeah, I think Michelle have taught us so much, and for this session, I just bring three main points that I think very important. I think in the past, I just read article without even taking note. So, and then I jump to the next article and then say, I came across this point in the past and I could not find the one that I read before. So, and then what I learned is that, it wastes a lot of time. So I think it's important to really not taking annotate what you have read and don't worry to say what you think. This is very important. I think as Cambodian myself, I was a student myself in primary school, secondary school, high school back in Cambodia. I was like, I could not really raise my voice because I'm afraid that they all are big people in the area, in the academic. I just small little girl, I don't know what to say. And Michelle said, raise your voice. Where is your voice in this writing? So I think this is the main thing that I learned. And now I've kind of confident to say what I think about that big author. I kind of like, can challenge back. I think first point is about keeping note. That's very important. Secondly, is about how you store those notes, how you filing, your own filing system is very important. As a PhD student, you're gonna read hundreds of journal articles, book, publication, report, website, secondary resources, primary resources. So you need to have a very good system to keep track of what you have read. And that's very important. I think the second, so myself and Michelle, so we create some sort of filing system protocol. So then we know what draft we work on, how to save it. And I think Michelle, we go through it later on in the presentation. So yeah, so to sum up, annotation, always have to take note. Secondly, is about how to use your voice. Don't be afraid, say what you think. Your supervisor will correct it if it's wrong, hopefully. And then thirdly, is about your filing system. I think that's very important.
And just before we move on, I might just say, when you're taking notes, there are two different kinds of notes to take, right? One is your overarching analysis and perceptions. And as Vitra said, it's very important to put your own thoughts down when you first read it. So if you're keeping notes, it's always good to have a space to put what you think. And some of the things you might want to think about there are the quality of the piece. And that isn't just which journal it's published in, because sometimes that doesn't guarantee quality. It's about, is it well structured? Is it logical? Do they provide evidence for their arguments? Do they provide good resources in the bibliography? Because sometimes people can write very well. It can look beautiful, but it actually, if you dig underneath the pretty writing, it's not very good, right? So don't think just because something sounds very good that it is good. You really have to think critically. So the first kind of notes, I think, is that critical note taking. Then there's the note taking about things you might want to quote that you need a page number for. And I worked with a colleague once who drove me crazy because she'd find these great points, but because she never wrote down the page number, even if she knew what article it was from, which she didn't always know, it would take so long to, I mean, if it was a direct quote, it would be okay, right? If you knew what article, because you can just do a Control F and search. But the fact that she had these ideas but didn't know where they came from wasted a lot of time. So it's really good if you're taking detailed notes after you've done your big thinking notes to actually make sure you note the source and the page number next to every one. And of course, if you're using a system like EndNote or Zotero, that's very helpful to get that set up. So some of us will talk more about that later.
Okay, so just to going further on our conversation, Vajra, thanks for sharing all the important tips. I wonder how have these strategies that you learned from Michelle have you work more efficiently so far in doing literature review and also your research?
Time saving. It's just important, and it could potentially drive us crazy if we don't keep a good track of all what we have known. I think the benefits that I learned is that it helped me as a person right now, and also my future me. I mean, if next time I want to, let's say, write a journal article, then I'm for sure need to go back and review what I have read and then bring that together. So I'm not only doing it for now, but also as a gift for me to my future me, so that I can be a happy person, not frustrated. Yeah.
Yeah, and were there anything that you find challenging in getting yourself used to this new process, including getting yourself more organized, having a system for yourself? I know these things, if you're not used to, it can be a little bit tricky at the beginning. And yeah.
Well, it's never easy, but it gets easier. So what I'm trying to say is that you cannot expect the PhD journey or research journey easy. I've considered myself as explorer. Like you go into the forest, you're gonna prepare what you're gonna find and try to dig until you feel like, okay, this is what I really want to look for. So the challenge that I still have is that to bring all together all the author, their thinking, but also what I think across the broad literature. For example, I'm talking about like 20 different authors that discuss one single topic. And then I'm just in the middle of the 20 well-known people. And then I feel like, okay, so what I'm gonna say with author A, author B, author C. So I need to really synthesize and really critical in interacting with those articles and bring my own thinking, on the paper. So I think this is still a challenge and I'm working through it. And I think, it's a learning process, as you said earlier. So, yeah.
And so you're not always with your supervisor all the time. Like sometime during the break, and as a researcher, you a lot of time, like during the pandemic, you work remotely, and you don't, sometimes you get stuck and you can't just always ask your supervisor. And so how do you overcome those challenges when you when you say, for example, you get stuck with how to synthesize your ideas when you review literature and stuff like that, if Michele is not around?
Miss Michele almost all the time around. But anyway, let's say if she's not around, I think I try to join the university session. So at the University of Sydney, with higher education, a higher degree of research. So normally we have, session that we can talk to other PhD students, postdoc, about research, about literature reviews. So I try to participate in those sessions, and then try to ask questions. And also I talk to my peers. Peer support, very important. So I talk with them about how they do their literature review, what happened if they stuck. So that kind of conversation along the way also helped me a lot. Yeah. So not only rely on Michele 100%, but also rely on other support that I have. So that also moving me forward.
Good support network is very important in graduate studies. Michele, you have anything to add to what Vajra has shared with us? Okay, and then please go ahead.
I guess I would just say that if someone keeps relying on me, I feel like I have failed, because of course the supervisor's job is to make independent scholars. But having a community of peers is great, and not just meeting for coffee and talking about your social lives, but actually helping each other to be better scholars. So being quite open, being supportive but critical when you read people's work and comment, maybe workshop some ideas. You could go and meet someone and say, these are my 6 best ideas at the moment. Can I run them past you? What do you think? You know this literature too. Have I interpreted it correctly? And so on. So actually using that to help you along. Just one other comment. I have been answering some of the questions that are open in the answer section. So if you're interested in the answers to other people's questions, you can put them there. But there's one about plagiarism in Khmer literature, which Sampuas and Tree, you might have to answer. Sampuas, is it time for me to pull up my presentation?
Not
yet.
We have about I don't know how long your presentation is, but we have about 35 more minutes until this session ends.
We have an exercise in it for people to do. So I think it would be good. Yeah.
I think we can start there. You can start pulling your slides and then people can ask questions along the way.
Excellent. Okay, so everyone can see my slides? Sampuas, can you just nod if you can see them?
Yes.
Yep.
I can see your slide.
Okay, so I have some slides that Vitra and I have put together, and I'm going to talk through them, but she's going to jump in if she has some comments to make. So our job was to talk about the more technical things of putting a literature review together. So hopefully, if you have some questions that we haven't answered so far, this will help to answer them. So first, the main thing to think about is refining your systems. And Vitra started talking about this in one of her answers. It's very important to remember that when you're writing literature review, some of it's really heavy brain work and some of it's really basic stuff, right? And if you do the basic stuff more effectively, it will take up less of your time, you'll be less frustrated, and you'll have more room for the brain work. So this is why it's worth investing early and setting up your systems. Systems are easy to use if you start with good systems. If you try to put in a system when you're halfway through a big project, it's much harder because then you have to retrofit the things you've done. So the things we're going to talk about briefly today are how to file your materials effectively, how to read for main points and argument, how to collect the information you need systematically, and what to focus on when you are bringing it all together. And you will have noticed that there was an article distributed via the web chat early in the session. And we will need that later because the reason we need our 35 minutes is because some of the time at the end, you're going to be doing some literature review analysis. So please be prepared for that. But don't worry, you'll have time to do that when we get to it. So talking about filing, there are many different ways to file, and it's not necessarily one is better than the other. The main thing is that you are consistent. And the way I do it, you can see an example there, is I use an author name, the year, an underscore, and a short title. The short title is important because if you have a Mac, you can have really long titles and it makes no difference. But sometimes when you try to back them up into the cloud or onto a PC, if the title is really long, it won't work. So the reason I bother, I don't just put Caraway Ford 2020 is because by having the short title, it reminds me what the article is about. Now, I don't use Zotero, I use EndNote because that's what my university has. And EndNote, I think Zotero does this too, lets you put the file, the PDF in the program. But for I prefer not to do that because I think there's a lot of different ways that you can access materials. And the way I like to do it is I have my reference system, which is EndNote. I might have my notes in the notes field. I might have all that sort of information, but I keep the PDFs in a separate big file and if I've labeled them all consistently, I can search for the short title, or I can go down and just scroll down to the author if I know what the author is. And I find sometimes that's faster than using the EndNote for me. So I like to have both options. Related to that is thinking about how you store them. And there's lots of different ways. Depending, if you're just a student and you have a small number of references, you would want to keep them all together. But as you move on, if you're in an academic career, you may have a lot of references that deal with different things. So I use a mixture of this. I have a central PDF repository where every PDF I've ever downloaded lives, and it's all labeled correctly. And it's in an EndNote somewhere, because when I download it, I use the cite function on Google Scholar and I dump it into the EndNote straight away. And Sampuas is going to talk about how to do that with Zotero in the next section. But sometimes I take some subsectors of that and do it by project. So for example, at the moment, Sampuas and I are writing some things about workers in the tourism industry in Siem Reap. So we have some folders that have some articles in them. And we're writing 3 different articles at the same time. So we actually have 3 different folders that have the articles that are most relevant to each of those topics. Because for the short term, that makes it very easy to deal with a small number of sources. And as it says here, the advantage of that is that it's much easier to browse things if they're all together by project, rather than, like, I have, I don't know, 6,000 PDFs, maybe more than that in my PDF file. So I wouldn't want to be looking in my master PDF file all the time. But 3 years later, I might want to use an article I found for something else. So if it's in the master PDF file, it means that it's easy for me to find things. Okay, now this is probably the more challenging thing, which is reading for main points and arguments. So this is the process that I would recommend. We might have some other thoughts from Vitra or even Sampuas. And the first thing is to actually read the abstract and the introduction and methodology, and then the discussion and the conclusion. And sometimes it's good to read the abstract, the introduction, and the conclusion first, and then go back to the other bits. But I would skim it first, the main bits. Don't think too much about the body, the results section. Think really about the argument first, and the abstract and the introduction and the conclusion will help you most there. The methodology might be important, because if you find they're using a methodology that's really different from yours, it might not be worth reading the article too carefully. So the main thing to do is to have a quick read first to decide how much time you should invest in that article, because you don't spend the same amount of time reading each article. You should have a way of triaging them, of sorting them out into different categories. Oh, this is the sort of article that I'll just write a quick note about its argument and so on, because I might need that. Oh, this one, I want to do that. And then I'm going to take some really detailed notes, because I know that I will have to use the information in this article a lot more. So that's important. It's also good to start creating a concept map or a mind map. And this is particularly important if you're new to a field. If you're already doing a lot of work in a field, there are many things that you kind of know, even if you don't know exactly what the source is. But if you're new, you might want to start thinking about the concepts that are used a lot in a particular literature. And again, different disciplines might use different concepts when talking about the same thing, in which case I would recommend that you try making a mind map for the different disciplines first. So reading the sociology stuff about it first, then reading the political science stuff, then reading the economic stuff, or whatever your disciplines are, rather than mixing them all in together at first, because that will help you understand the conceptual domain in each discipline, and then you can mix them up. But if you start mixing them up first, it's much more challenging. And I've included a link there to a mind mapping little article I found this afternoon that I thought might be useful for you. Another issue is about collecting the material systematically. And I think this is important because, especially if you're coming back to a topic over time, say doing a PhD or doing a big research project, you can forget what you did. And it's important to be thorough, right? You don't want to just go in and pick a few things because you thought they looked interesting. You want to do a systematic search. And one of the things that can help you with this is actually noting down the time when you looked. So if I look today, then my search would obviously finish in February 2023. If I came back a year later, I don't want to search all the stuff to February 2023 again. I just want to search between February 2023 and February 2024. So keeping a log of the periods, when you did the search and what keywords you used will really help you to be systematic about your searches. Now, there are lots of ways of searching. If you have access to a good library, they might have databases and so on. But even though the University of Sydney has a really excellent library with lots of databases, I actually use Google Scholars first because I find that it's more accessible for me. And also, when I download the citation from Google Scholar, I might have to tweak it a bit, but it's more accurate than our libraries is often. So there's also that little element. It also means that I'm not stuck because databases tend to be organized around particular publishers. And so if you look online, then you can find across a wide range of journal publishers. Now, I put an answer to one of the questions in the text, which was about how do you, what am I thinking about? Which one I did? What happens if you don't have access to a good library? And one of the things I recommend is have a look at university repositories, because often people put in the second last version of what they wrote and it's freely accessible. Also things like academia and ResearchGate. Often people, even if they're breaking copyright, will put up a copy of their article on that and you can download it. Or I know that ResearchGate, for example, has a function where people can say, write to the author and say, do you mind sending me a copy of your article? Now, you shouldn't do that if you can find it a different way. But if it's important and you get stuck, you can do that. And I get a lot of these requests, especially from Southeast Asia. And, you know, I might not send it every day that they come in, but every few days or every couple of weeks, I go in and I actually send them. So, you know, even if you don't have access to good libraries, there are ways to get things. Now, the next thing is, and we mentioned this in the first section, is that if you find a good article, then its bibliography becomes a very good way of finding other good articles. So make sure that you look at the references cited in the articles you read. And even if they're not really new, for some topics that doesn't matter, right? It can be quite useful to see how people used to think about something, or it might be the only thing on a rare topic. So don't worry about if it's a bit old. Then the next thing is there are actually software programs now that will map fields of literature. There's a bunch of these, but one of the ones that I've come across is called Research Rabbit. And so it draws a schema of different authors in particular fields. You put in some topics and it draws you a map of highly cited scholars on particular topics. So again, if you're very new to an area, that can be a great way of finding things out. So how do you bring it together? There are lots of ways of doing this. Everyone has different ways. I myself use several different ways, but what I recommend to my students, particularly if they're struggling with literature reviews, is to use a spreadsheet, because this it forces you to think more systematically about what you read. And I've got a bunch of headings that I recommend here, but the main ones here are about the key theoretical questions and the key empirical questions. Sometimes it's a bit hard to tell the difference between a theoretical question and an empirical question. The empirical questions are easier to find, right? The theoretical one, sometimes an author won't tell you explicitly what their theoretical question is. You really have to read between the lines to get it. And then some articles just don't have a theoretical question, and some articles don't have an empirical question. But a lot of work, especially on, in a lot of disciplines, but a lot of the literature on Southeast Asia, a lot of the articles definitely will have one empirical question or more, and they may or may not have a theoretical question. So by answering these questions, you actually get the key points out of the article. And this is the exercise you're going to do very shortly. But just before we do, I wanted to show you one. You might not be able to read that very clearly, but this is a screenshot of one of my PhD students' literature review spreadsheets. And you can see in the first column is the bibliographical reference, then a quick sentence about the focus of the article, the relevance to her thesis, the key theoretical question, its answer, the key empirical question, its answer, other key points, and her notes. And sometimes her notes might have something in about this wasn't a very good article, or it wasn't very convincing, or it might be a key point that she really wants to remember. So what we're going to do is you're going to do not a whole one of these, because we won't have time for that. You're just going to do a small bit. And what we're going to do is get you to open the spreadsheet that you've been sent. Don't do it quite yet. Let me read all the instructions to you. Read the abstract, the introduction, and the conclusion, nothing else. And then I want you to just fill in 3 columns. I want you to write a sentence on the topic of the article. I want you to identify the key theoretical question or questions, and the key empirical question or questions, and write it into the spreadsheet. Once you've done that, we're going to actually compare our answers. So make sure that you do it. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give you, let's say, probably 12 minutes to do this and just get as far as you can. But I picked an article where it's possible. It's one I helped write. And we're going to come back in about 8 minutes to the next hour and talk through your answers. Okay. Happy reading and writing. Sampwas, do you want to do this exercise? We might use you as a guinea pig.
I can try.
Okay.
But
excellent. Okay, well, sorry for the mix up about the spreadsheet, but the actual 3 questions you could answer without them. So let's just think about them. What I want you to do, because we're a webinar, not everyone can say it in person, but please, in the Q&A function, please put what you thought was the topic of the article. So type in your topic sentence or cut and paste it if you wrote it down. I'll give you just 2 minutes to do that. And let's have at least, a bunch of topics put in the chat, please, in the Q&A, please. Come on, none yet? Who can be the first? Don't be shy. As Vitra said, there's no problem with being wrong. There's only a problem with not having a go. No one's going to have a go? Come on. Be the first person. Okay, we'll go to plan B. Sampwas, where are you? What did you think the topic of this article was?
So the topic of this article was about the understanding the brand and the role of state in responding to the brand and the labor issues in their country.
Okay, radio. And what do you think the theoretical question was?
So
hang
the
on, someone in the Q&A.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. With the OI, you've said joint national efforts made by 3 different Southeast Asia countries aimed at minimizing the COVID impact on the garment industry supply chain. That's certainly an important part of the topic. Does anyone else want to put something in the chat before we move on? Any other guesses? Thoughts? Okay, so before you answer, Sampwas, who's going to give me an answer in the chat for the empirical questions asked in the article? The empirical questions. This is the easy one. Oh, Philippa, thank you. Philippa's reworded the abstract, the interplay between brands, labour governments and unions in mitigating the impact of disruption to garment supply chains. Well done. Yes, chat's disabled. You have to put it in the Q&A if you want to contribute. So the empirical questions, someone who's not Philippa and not, I don't know how to say your name, sorry, I'm not very good with Cambodian names with the Ui. Could someone else have a go at what the empirical questions? This is so easy for this article, which is why I chose it.
It's in the introduction part.
It's in the introduction. Yeah. What are they, Sampwas? Read them out for us.
So it's actually in the introduction at second to the bottom paragraph. It's the first question is, what did producer country unions exercise in the face of brands' refusal to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on workers in their global supply chains? And the second empirical question is, what does the experience of the pandemic tell us about the role of state in the producer countries?
Okay, so there are 2 questions that we can answer about those 3 countries. What is the theoretical question? This is harder because we don't actually say it explicitly. And that's often the case, right? Often articles, and depends on the discipline, but often articles won't say explicitly what their theoretical question is. Does anyone want to have a go before Sampwas tells us what she thinks? She hasn't seen my answers yet.
I gave a little hint at the beginning when you asked me about the article.
Mhm.
I would let participant throw it in here.
Okay, does anyone else want to put anything in the chat before in the question and answer? No? Okay, what's the theoretical question, Sampwas?
So the theoretical question is actually in the abstract itself. If you read it a little bit harder, it's how do we understand the role of state in responding to the external crisis that affect the supply chains in those countries?
Exactly. And even more generally, because often theoretical questions are framed more generally, I would say it is how do we understand the role of the state in responding to externally driven crises affecting supply chains? So not just COVID, not just this particular thing, but the more general thing, right? And of course, for me, really the focus of the article is on the trade union responses, because the trade unions are about the agents in this. We're saying that the trade unions tried to deal with the brands and they weren't interested, so they had to deal with the state, right? But you can see, I mean, you didn't have much time and we had some trouble with the resources, but you can see that by writing those very simple things down, when you come back to this article, you don't have to read the introduction and the conclusion and the abstract again. You can just look at those three things. And of course, if you'd done it, you would have said why it's relevant to your work, and you would have answered those questions and also put some other notes. You might have said, oh, this isn't a very well-structured article, or this article is really convincing for these reasons, whatever you think, as long as it's critically based. Okay, well, it's 2 minutes to the hour, so this is the end of Vitra's and my session. Vitra, did you want to say anything in the last 2 minutes? Any final hints for our participants?
Yeah, I think the article that we share is one of the well-written article. I think because Michelle said it, and I think I would encourage to learn from the structure. You know, if you want to improve your writing, and yeah, keep learning. It's the process. You're not gonna be a very good researcher overnight. It's like 3-year journey or maybe longer. So I think take your time, and because we already shared that article, so maybe spend some more time, read through it, and understand the structure. Also important.
Okay, and I can see someone was apologizing in the chat for being quiet. That's fine. It is good to be brave, but sometimes we do just want to listen and think, and that's fine too. But I think the main thing is there are lots of resources out there. So you saw that in the break, I found 3 things about good literature reviews, right? Now, the thing is you have to be critical about those as well, right? And not just pick the first thing you see, but think about what you learned tonight and then what speaks to that. There are lots of resources about how to do literature reviews, how to do searches, how to do research more generally. So even if you're finding it challenging, finding resources in your university or your workplace, you can still really teach yourself a lot. And as Vitra said, a really good way to do this is to look at models, to look at samples of things that are good, and then really think about how they're structured and what tricks and tips they use to make their writing good. Vitra and I are going to leave now because it's getting a bit well into the evening in Australia, but thank you so much for everyone who's still with us. I hope these sessions have been useful for you, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot after the 10-minute break about Zotero from Sampwas. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. See you in 10 minutes again. Thank you, Michelle and Vitra. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us through the entire sessions, to those who are still here. And so this last session of our workshop today is going to be a little bit technical and we'll need a lot more of your engagement. So before I get started, I'd like everyone to please download this the Zotero link. Maybe some of you have already downloaded. If you haven't, please do so. And it won't take long. It will only take a few minutes to download and get it set up on your computer. And during my presentation, I will ask you to do some exercise. And I'm gonna share my screen now, and please let me know if you can see my screen or not. Okay. So today I'm going to introduce you into a new bibliography site tool, management tool. However, before we get started, I wanted to also know what kind of citation tool are you familiar with, and and how useful it was for you. You can pop it in the Q&A chat, and so that I can see as well before we moving on to our presentation today. If you know of any other citation tool, or you already know of Zotero before. Okay, we know someone say they have used, Philippa have used Zotero, or familiar with Zotero, but still new. And somebody used citation machine. So anyway, there are a few citation tool or bibliography management tool out there, including, besides Zotero, including EndNotes, Mendeley, and some other like this. Somebody mentioned here as well, citation machine, etc. There are some online citation tool as well beside the software one, like a program one like this one. So the reason I'm providing this Zotero training, because I think it's important. As we all know that research and research writing is a very tedious process, and itself is a long journey, and it involves many planning and organizing tasks. So having a tool that can help us manage our bibliographies is very useful and helpful, and save you a lot of time and keeping yourself organized as you go through your research process. And so today there are a few things that I'm going to cover with providing this tool training is how to search for resource effectively with the Google Scholar, and also through the library that I have access with which is the CKS library, and also how to get the details from the internet, like from Google Scholar or the library, into your Zotero software program on your computer, and how to insert citation while writing, and also customize your input styles on Zotero itself, and also a few other hints on how to sync the reference from Zotero into your Word document. So the reason I'm introducing Zotero today is because some other citation tools are not free. For example, like EndNote, you need to purchase license, and it's a little more complicated in learning how to use it. And whereas Zotero is a free tool that you can easily download, and it's easy to use. You can also learn how to use it by yourself at your free time, and it helps you manage your keeping your bibliography organized, allowed you to annotate, cite, and also share your research, meaning you can also say if you co-conducting a research, you can also use the same tool and collaborate with your co-researcher on it as well. And it's 100% safe and free of virus when you download it. So first you need to, because I'm using a MacBook, I'm just putting a screenshot here of what it looks like on a MacBook and Zotero for 6 for Mac. But if you use a Windows computer, you can also click on the Windows here to download. And however, because this tool require you to also download a connector on your browser, either Google Chrome or other internet browser, you can do so. So you need to download it twice. First is this download right here, and then install the connector. I put the link in the chat also, but if you haven't, please write it in the Q&A and we can send you the link to download again. There's also, there's also a link right here. So what can you do with Zotero? So Zotero allowed you to create, edit, and organize your reference metadata. You can also organize folders, and you can also snapshots any website and put it in Zotero as your reference too. It's not just for articles or books or other online resource, but even website you can also cite it, manage it in Zotero. You can also store PDF or notes or other like videos or video clips or attached to the citation. Say, for example, you want to cite a YouTube video, and you can also attach the video on it too. And it allowed you to create its citation and also create bibliography, which you can insert directly onto your Word document. So and before we move on, I also want to note that I'm not a certified trainer of Zotero, and I'm also not an expert. I'm only sharing my personal experience of using it because I've started to use this when I was a PhD student back in Hawaii. And I learned from the University of Hawaii librarian who provided this training. And also, if you have a different experience with using Zotero on other computer other than an Apple computer, it shouldn't be very much different. Should be simple to understand. The feature may look a little different, but other functions should be the same. But what I cover today will be useful, especially if you are using a MacBook. So. Sorry, I'm having a little. So like Michelle mentioned earlier, even if you have access to a good library resource, Google Scholar is always the best place to find the reliable resources. And also because the citation on Google Scholar is a lot more accurate, and you can also easily save it to your Zotero. And also, before you start finding your resources online, like on Google Scholar, you want to make sure you download the Zotero connector, which I mentioned earlier, which is a plugin extension. So that way, the PDF, if it's an open source, say, for example, like an article is, it's an open access journal and the PDF is available, that PDF will be automatically downloaded from Google Scholar and attached to that reference you have in your Zotero. However, if the article doesn't automatically download, that means it's not an open source, but you can always, if you able to find, to download the resource from other source, say like from a library, or you ask somebody to have you download, or through a ResearchGate, you can always attach that file to the reference that you have. I will show you the example later. And also, I just want to note that too, if you use multiple browser like Safari, Google Chrome, or Firefox, you would want to download multiple connectors to to your browser. It's an extension. Otherwise, if you only have it on your Google Chrome, but then you search for resource on the Firefox, you wouldn't be able to save it to the Zotero on your computer. So moving on to next slide. So this is what it looks like if you use Google Chrome. When you download the Zotero and you install it on your computer, and then you download Zotero connector, it will automatically show up here, and it has the letter Z here. You want to go to your Google Chrome setting and look at the extensions, and then it opens up and it'll show you Zotero on here. And you also want to also pay attention to this button right here. If you disable it, you still wouldn't be able to download the citation into your Zotero. So you want to have this enable on your Google Chrome or whatever browser you use on your extension. That way, when you go to Google Scholar to find your article and save to Zotero, it will download automatically. So here's an example. So when I go to Google Scholar and I search for, say I want to find an article on resilient theory related to tourism studies, I just type in and then I find a bunch of articles related to the topics that I searched for. And so what I did, I just click on this. Sometimes it shows letter Z, sometimes it shows a folder. It shows a folder here because I already organized the folder on my Zotero. But if it's not, it's okay, it's still the same. You just have to click on it, and then it will show you all the article available to resilient theory and tourism studies, and you just click on this extension right here, and then it will save automatically to your Zotero on your account. Whereas for the library catalog, if you search from library, it can look a little different, and it depends on the library that you search for. Sometimes you cannot save it the way you save, like the Google Scholar, like this one. So what you can do to save resource to your Zotero, you can select the article on the library, and then you right click, and then it will show Zotero connector, and then you click on save to Zotero. That if you cannot save using that extension at the top of your internet browser. And here on Zotero, on the app, you can, after you download, it will look very empty, like just my library and other folders like here. But then you can always create a folder, like click on this function right here, and then you create a folder and you rename it just like how you create a folder on your computer. Very simple. And then it will have option for you to also create subfolder and rename your folder. So the folder right here, I find it useful because if you work on multiple research projects and then you want to find resources relevant to each of your project, save to this, you can name your folder based on the project you work on, and then you save your resource into each folder. I'll show you how you put the resource into the correct folder on your Zotero in a little bit. But anyway, so on each folder, beside articles, you can also save other resource like ebook or other PDF like report, etc. But when you also want to be careful. Sometimes when you click on save, generally the reference will come automatically like this with like what kind of file this is, like what type of file is this, journal article, its title, the author's name, abstract, and etc. But then sometimes it happens not all the information for the reference is generated like here. If it doesn't, it won't show on here. So you can click on it and then you can edit on this to correct the reference. So I know it's not perfect, but at least it have keeping your resources organized. And so when you create a Zotero library, this is what it looks like. This is when I first download the Zotero and work on it. So after I download, I only have my library folder right here. And then I create the subfolder under my library by clicking on this button and then rename it. And then I save the resource from Google Scholar, like I just showed you earlier, and it automatically downloaded into here. And so some article were open access. It shows a PDF right here. It shows the attachment. So if it has a PDF here, that means, oh, the article is in open access and you can also click on it. And then there will be a new tab up here showing the PDF that attached to that article. And this is another example I mentioned earlier. Some articles doesn't generate the reference automatically and you want to edit it and double check to make sure all the information were placed correctly. And also for each article, if you want to make notes, say like you read through it and you highlights and you want to make notes, you can right click on it and then this note, and then it will ask if you want to take note, and you can write a note on it. It's like a note sticker, like you write on your book or like on PDF file, like if you right click. I will show you in real time in Zotero, but this is just a brief for now. And for the editing notes and reference on Zotero library itself that I just mentioned, for example, this article does not have the full reference information on it. I don't know why. Sometimes it can be error from the auto download, but you can always edit it by going back to Google Scholars and find information in the citation, and then you edit on it based on what the information on the article itself, including the publication, the volume, the issue date, etc., and then it will automatically adjust to here. And so how do you generate bibliography from Zotero after you correct everything? Like this one right here, I corrected it. So I have a full accurate reference right here. So you can select all the articles on your Zotero library, and then you right click, and then it will have an options for you to create a bibliography from items. And then you can click on that, and then this will pop up. It will ask you what kind of bibliography citation style do you need. Like you have a lot of like all the common citations style, APA, Chicago, Harvard, etc. Say you want an APA 7 edition, you can select on that, and then you click bibliography, and then you want to select copy to clipboard. That way you can copy it to your Word document, and with the citation style that you chose. And this is after I copy it to so after I click on bibliography and copy to clipboard, and then I open a Word document and I copy it, this is what it looks like. So what a APA citation style look like. It comes in order. Now I know it's been a lot. Now I want to give you 10 minutes to try it. I assume you have already downloaded your Zotero, so I want you to go to Google Scholar and learn how to save a resource into your Zotero. I will also I will come back after 10 minutes and to see if anyone has any question with learning how to save resource from Google Scholar to your Zotero. Put your questions on the Q&A so I can answer or show you how it works. I'll give a couple more minutes, then I'll move on with the presentation. Okay, so now I'm going to move on with a few more slides on how to insert citations from Zotero to your Word document. Assuming nobody have any question. So now that we learned how to save resources from Google Scholar and libraries to Zotero, now we want to learn how to use Zotero with your Word document. So first you want to go to, you want to link Zotero also to your Word, not just with your internet browser. That way you can easily insert citations from Zotero or reference from Zotero or bibliography from Zotero to your Word document. So to link that, you first need to open Zotero app, which is this app. Make sure it's open, and then you go to Zotero preference menu. So I'll go to Zotero preference menu right here, and then you see word processors, and then you want to install Microsoft Word add-in. It shows reinstall here because I already installed it for my Microsoft Word. So all you need to do is just click on install Microsoft Word add-in, and then it should automatically add into your Word document when you click on it. And then there will be, so on your Word document, there will be an option right here. It shows Zotero. This is after you install the add-in, and then you can see here add or edit citation, add note, or add or edit bibliography from Zotero. So and then where in Zotero menu in Word. So I just show you in earlier in the where Zotero is in Word. So, and then after you install the add-in, you can click on the add and edit citation on here, and say like you click on add and edit like I do on here as and I'm guessing because I opened so many windows at the same time. Anyway, so when you click on add or edit button on your Word document, there this function will pop up, and you can search. Okay, so you have a reference you want to insert on your text. Say you want to find an author's name, Ladisma 2014. You can click on this button and you search Ladisma 2014, and make sure you put the cursor wherever you want to insert that citation. That will automatically cite for you in the correct format that you chose. And the same thing with bibliography. You just click on add bibliography, add your reference on your document, and then it will come up in the same order like I showed you earlier. But if you want, you can also did the copy to clipboard like I showed you earlier. So there are two ways that you can insert your bibliography to your Word document. And so I just want to, before I end this presentation, I just want to draw your attention to the details when you work with Zotero, is that you want to make sure you have all the information you need for your bibliography on this side of on this sidebar of your Zotero, like I just showed earlier, including the title of the article, the authors, the journal's name, the volume issues, and page number, etc. And this way, you keep your resource well organized in one place, and you don't have to go back to it when you finish writing and you want to insert your bibliography. Everything is already in one place. So I'm going to skip this exercise because we're also running out of time, and I will share this slide later. You can try it. So I don't know if you have any questions. If you do, please pop it in the Q&A chat, and I can try to answer what I know. So does anyone have any question? Okay, I guess if not, I just want to put a few key takeaways here, is that Zotero is actually a very simple program, and it shouldn't take long for you to get used to it. And what I showed you earlier is just an overview of it, and you can always explore it yourself. I honestly just learned the basic as well, and then I explored myself after I attended a training at my former university library. I will share with you this slide, and you can go through the steps and explore it. And honestly, once you have the Zotero set up and you explore it yourself and you get used to the function, I can tell you that you wouldn't want to go back to manage your bibliography manually again. And because when you write for publications or even for your class, sometimes they ask for different reference. So having Zotero is so easy because you can always switch reference style, both for your bibliography and also for in-text citation. So it saves you a lot of time. So the key thing for you to remember when you work with Zotero is make sure you're getting the details of the resource in and out correctly from wherever you save it from, Google Scholar, library, wherever you find it. And I also forgot to mention, you can also save other online resource like report or newspaper article onto it as well. The same way I show you for the library, right click, and then you will see an option to Zotero. Right click on that resource. So that's about it for the presentation today. And I also put a few links here for you to learn more about Zotero from a librarian who is a certified trainer of Zotero, and also tips for you how to get started and more in depth about what Zotero can do to help you with your research and bibliography management. I saw that there are, okay, just comment. Thank you very much for staying in to learn more about Zotero. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and this slide will be available to you after the workshop webinar today. And that's it for my presentation today. Thank you. I don't know, on somebody or CKS, do you have any things to add, or that's it for today?
Thank you so much, Sumpor, and thank you to everyone who stayed with us from the beginning until now. And I hope that you have gained a lot of knowledge about literature review and find all the tips that our speaker shared today are very helpful. Even though I'm not a researcher, but I used to be a student at university as well, and I could see that everything that has been shared within this workshop today is very helpful and something new, that something that we normally did it manually in the past, but and I never learned about other tools that we can really use to do the literature review and keep all the reference in one place like this. So I hope that today everyone has gained new knowledge and tips that will be very helpful for you for your future. And also thank you to Support who has been who have presented very well today and all the tips to all of us today. And thank you everyone, and I hope that we will have another session in the future and we'll have you back to join us again. Thank you so much and have a very nice day and the evening as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.